Back in 1942, the USA Navy was gearing up to strike back at Japan for the Pearl Harbor attack, sending out torpedo bombers and fighter planes across the South Pacific. On January 16th, pilot and Chief Harold Dixon, bombardier Tony Postula, and radioman Gene Aldrich are out on a patrol mission. They end up getting separated from the other aircraft and can't quite figure out where they are. Dixon believes they should head back to their carrier, but Gene finds out they're out of reception and low on fuel. Tony drops the bombs into the sea to try and gain some altitude, but it doesn't really do much. With communications still down, Dixon figures it's best to make an emergency landing before they run out of fuel and crash. The plane touches down safely on the water, and Dixon emerges wearing his life jacket, pulling the life raft along. Unfortunately, his crew isn't faring as well. They're really struggling to get out of their seats and almost end up drowning, but they manage to escape just in time. Unfortunately, that means they miss the chance to grab any supplies before the plane goes under. Dixon and Gene let go of their weapons as well, making it easier for them to float, but Tony is still holding on to his. They finally get the raft inflated, but guess what? It's upside down. They tied their life jackets together and tossed them over the raft, making a handle that helped them pull and flip the raft so they could finally get on it. Now they just need to hang tight until someone finds them. The next morning, Dixon and Gene have a little chat about what went down, with each guy hinting that the other might have messed up somehow. Since that conversation wasn't getting them anywhere, they figured it was best to take watch and stay alert for any planes that might fly by. So it turns out they got a bit lucky because a plane flies by a few hours later. But unfortunately, it's still too far away for anyone to see them, even when they take off their shirts and wave them around while shouting. The plane's about to take off, and Dixon says this is their one shot. The plane was on a search mission and wouldn't change course to avoid entering enemy territory. The war is more important than just 3 soldiers. So the procedure states they only get a quick glance, right? Dixon, focused on their survival, announces that the raft is now a ship of the USA Navy, and he's the captain, which means Tony and Gene will have to follow his lead. They check what's in their pockets, but it's not a lot. Just some tools, a few random bits like wires and an empty water bag. Gene has a knife that Dixon tells him to keep in his pocket so they don't accidentally cut the raft. Dixon tells everyone to take off their shoes and toss them into the ocean to protect the raft from getting worn out. But he keeps his own shoes on, which really annoys Gene. As the hours and days go by, the soldiers do their best to keep from letting the isolation get to them. They talk about all sorts of things and sometimes even break into song to have a little fun. Tony is really into cleaning his gun, but he also tells Gene that he'll introduce him to his sister because they would be a great match. The sun is blazing during the day, so they gradually shed their layers of clothing, ending up with blisters on their skin. The nights are pretty chilly, and when they try to sleep, they end up haunted by nightmares about drowning or feeling guilty about the mistake that landed them in this mess to begin with. So, the 3 of them don't all sleep at once. One person always stays awake, and they take turns keeping an eye out for any planes or islands that might show up. So there's this moment when Dixon, in the middle of one of his watches, figures he might as well relieve himself in his own shoe and take a sip of his own pee, just to quench his thirst a bit. One morning, as a pleasant breeze gently moves the boat along, Dixon takes a moment to do some calculations to get a rough idea of their direction. So there's a possibility they might hit some islands, but that's not happening for weeks. In the meantime, Gene figures he should give fishing a shot to avoid starving. They grab some wire and cord to whip up a hook, tossing it into the sea, but whatever bites is really strong. Tony needs to help Gene reel it in, and when they finally get the end of the line back, they realize the hook is missing. A reminder that there are some pretty dangerous creatures lurking out there. Gene keeps at it. He just crafts a new hook and casts it out again, letting it sit in the water for as long as it takes. Eventually, the heat starts to bug him, so he grabs a life jacket and jumps off the boat to cool off a bit. Tony's eager to chase after him, but Dixon suggests they take it one step at a time for everyone's safety. He also points out that there are sharks in these waters, which freaks Gene out and makes him swim back to the raft, while Tony decides he's not jumping in next after all. As the days go by, the tension among the men keeps building, and Dixon's paranoia has him constantly questioning them about what happened on the plane, almost as if he's searching for someone to pin the blame on for their predicament. Thirst is becoming an issue, and Tony thinks maybe he could take a sip of seawater, but Dixon jumps in to stop him before he makes a bad choice. Gene is chatting about how many more shoes they might fill with the yellow stuff when Dixon suddenly interrupts, shouting in triumph. He just discovered a pencil in his pocket that he hadn't noticed before. Now he can whip up a chart and keep track of where they're going. If they want to get to the island, they've got to make sure the wind is on their side. They grab a life jacket, some cord, and a bit of wire to whip up a sea anchor. This way, they can steer clear of being pushed off course if the wind decides to change things up. Another issue is their constant thirst. Gene shows the other two how to pray and ask God for rain, but it's not until later in the night that the weather starts to change. The men are laughing with joy as they gather as much rainwater as possible in their shirts and the water bag. After a week of drifting around, Gene finally gets fed up with not catching anything with his hook. So he pulls out his knife, brushing off Dixon's concerns about the raft. After a few random tries at the water, Gene hits the jackpot. He's managed to catch a shark. They haul it onto the raft and get ready to dig into the little fish it just ate. They stash the shark meat in their socks for later use as bait. So this little dinner of theirs is causing some serious trouble. They keep tossing the shark blood into the sea to clean the raft, and now other sharks have caught the scent and are trailing behind them. One night, Gene, feeling a bit drowsy, absent-mindedly dips his hand into the water and ends up getting bitten. Fortunately, he manages to pull it out before it slips away, and Dixon quickly wraps it up with Tony's bandana. But the harm is already done. It's been 2 weeks since the accident, and even though they haven't had another catch like that shark, they're getting one more rainy day to fill up their water bag. Hope is getting tough to hold on to, and Tony finds himself staring at his gun, weighed down by some pretty heavy thoughts. Just in the nick of time, Gene grabs it from him when a bird lands on their raft and takes a shot, sending the body plummeting into the ocean. Dixon quickly dives in to retrieve it, but the bird's blood has also caught the eye of a shark. The boys are trying to shoot it, but the gun jams up, leaving Dixon with no option but to swim as fast as he can. Fortunately, he manages to get back to the raft just in time, avoiding getting caught. Now they've got some bird meat to munch on, and Dixon thinks it tastes just like chicken. With the gun no longer usable, Tony tosses the bullets into the ocean, feeling a bit down about what this might symbolize as a sign of defeat. On the morning of day 20, Dixon wakes up and realizes that all 3 of them have been sleeping, which means there hasn't been anyone on watch. Gene feels like it's just not worth the hassle. It's been 2 days without any wind, and those islands aren't getting any closer. He questions Dixon about his map, puzzled about how he could have figured out their location when their plane was lost, and they didn't even know where they started from. He believes it's Dixon's fault that they got lost in the plane since he somehow flew them out of range. After a lot of back and forth, Dixon finally admits he thought they'd spot some islands a few days back, so yeah, their course is definitely off. He finally remembers what happened on the plane. He had dozed off. It was just a few minutes, but that was enough for them to miss their turn. He says he's sorry for what he did, realizing he can't really fix it. A gloomy vibe settles on the raft, so to lift everyone's spirits, Gene grabs the chart and points out that, even if it's not ideal, It's their best shot at getting back home. So, when Tony cracks a joke about making their own wind, Dixon suddenly has this light bulb moment. He grabs Gene's knife and starts cutting off the soles of his shoes. Then they all jump in and use those shoe soles to row. Pretty clever, right? A month after the incident, they finally get some rain again. But this isn't just your typical rain. It's a full-blown storm, complete with lightning. The waves get really high and rough, and before you know it, they flip the raft over. The guys end up in the water and lose the few tools they had, including their rowing shoes. But hey, the raft is what really matters. They hold on to each other and, with the wind's help, manage to flip the raft back into place. Once it's righted, they climb on and huddle close for warmth while waiting for the storm to pass. The rain has cleared up by morning, but the guys are just too worn out to do much besides lying down. Feeling completely hopeless, their chat takes a dark turn as they start talking about what to do with the body if one of them dies, thinking it might be food. They also reminisce about the folks back home who think they're dead, and it really hits Dixon hard when Tony and Gene assure him they wouldn't have sent him to court-martial for his mistake. Feeling fed up with the gloomy vibe and realizing they've come too far to throw in the towel, Tony rallies his friends to row with their hands, determined to give it their all no matter what. This really wears them out, so much so that Dixon ends up doing what he said he wouldn't, drinking seawater. Meanwhile, Tony falls into such a deep sleep that for a moment they actually think he might be dead. Out of nowhere, Gene sits up when he spots something green in the distance. They've finally found an island. Feeling a mix of desperation and determination, the men start rowing with their hands, tears in their eyes, as they push through the waves that finally carry them to the shore. The three of them touch down on the sand without a hitch, and as soon as they spot a couple of shacks nearby, they head over there, their legs a bit wobbly. They finally made it to land on February 20th, after 34 days of being lost at sea and sailing their raft over 1,000 miles. Once they're rescued, Dixon receives the Navy Cross for guiding his crew to safety, but he never takes to the skies for another combat mission. Due to his injuries, Tony isn't able to follow his dream of a Navy career, and when he passes away in 1986, his ashes are scattered at sea. Gene spends the war working as a radioman, and in 1946, he ties the knot with Tony's sister.